Um, so good morning again, everyone. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Byla Lindner. I work for an organization called Homebase. We are a nonprofit organization that provides technical assistance to the Office of Supportive Housing in Santa Clara County, and also housing and homeless service providers in Santa Clara County as well. I am joined today by my colleague Naneshwari. We are also really pleased today to be joined by three guest presenters who I'll mention in a moment. But again, today we are in day 2 of our 3-part series on the Violence Against Women Act and strategies for recognizing and working with survivors of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. And again, just a reminder that this is a 3-day training. Earlier this week, we had part 1, and that was Perla from Community Solutions, and she provided an overview of gender-based violence. Today, we are going to be talking about supporting survivors of gender-based violence again, with Detective Mindy from Morgan Hills Police Department and Karen from Step Forward. Today, we're going to be focusing in on exploring legal remedies for survivors, advocates' roles in supporting survivors, and law enforcement's role in supporting survivors as well, and strategies for effective collaboration. And then just a heads up that for day 3, which is next week, Homebase is going to be presenting an overview of the goals and requirements of the Violence Against Women Act and how it applies to COC-funded programs. And just a reminder that attendees need to register for each day individually. So in other words, just because you registered for today, you're still going to have to register for day 3 as well if you want to attend that. So just a couple of tech reminders. We are recording this training and we'll be making the recordings available on the COC website. The chat box will not be recorded and breakout rooms will not be recorded either. Everyone is muted upon entry and we ask that you remain muted unless we ask you to unmute yourself. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. We will be responding to questions bit by bit throughout the training. And also if you have any technical questions or technical issues with Zoom or whatever, feel free to also put that in the chat box either Did I get muted by accident? Okay, so I'm going to repeat myself. We have closed captioning. If you would like to access that, just click on the live transcript button. And I think that's all the tech stuff we have before we get going. So in order to just do like a quick icebreaker and introduce yourselves, it would be great if you all could put in the chat box your name, the organization that you work for, and maybe also your favorite vacation spot or place to relax. The beach, so good. Seems like that's a big one. Gardening, New Orleans, Hawaii. I've never been there before, but I would really love to go to Hawaii. Reno, yeah. Home, there's no place like home. The forest. Awesome. Sweet. Well, looks like we have a lot of votes for nature. That's always a good option. Always great. Okay, I am going to go ahead and share my screen again. I'm going to hand it over to Perla from Community Solutions to get it started.
Thank you, and I apologize. I'm having some Wi-Fi issues here at work, so I'm gonna have the camera off. And if I'm fading out, please let me know, because I've noticed that it's just really bad Wi-Fi connection today. Thank you for those of you that are joining us again, that attended Tuesday's training. That was a lot, so thank you for sitting through that. And I'm really happy today to be here to provide part 2 of our intersectional collaborative approach to gender-based violence. And so during day 1, we really talked about the intersectional piece and why it's so important to address gender-based violence in a way that is nuanced and comprehensive, and really moving away from silos that only focus on a specific type of violence, like intimate partner abuse, sexual assault, or human trafficking, but really screening for all different types of gender-based violence to ensure that survivors receive the most comprehensive support. And today, we're here to talk about the part 2 of our approach, which is the collaborative piece, and how we can leverage partnerships, both within the community-based organization sector, as well as nonprofit, as well as private, and particularly as well as government agencies like law enforcement. So it sounds like I'm sounding a little bit blurry. Is that the case for everybody? Are you guys having a hard time hearing me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, thank you. So again, today the focus is really on leveraging partnerships. I'm really excited to have here today 2 amazing colleagues and dear friends. We're going to have Karen Schultz from the Step Forward Foundation, and Karen Schultz is the founder and managing director of Step Forward Foundation, a nonprofit community-based organization that focuses on supporting individuals with around immigration relief, and also family law, employment law, other types of issues that come up for survivors of gender-based violence particularly. And Detective Mindy Sen with the Morgan Hill Police Department has many years of experience in supporting survivors of gender-based violence. She's an amazing ally, an amazing supporter and advocate for survivors of gender-based violence. And just to show how amazing she is, there's actually an award named after Mindy Sen, the Mindy Sen Award, that's given to professionals, individuals that really go above and beyond to support the community, and particularly survivors of gender-based violence. So can we go to the next slide, please? So today our focus is increased awareness of local, well, as an example, local family justice centers, which is a way to bring together that multidisciplinary approach, the collaborative approach, and then really understanding from these individual partners, because Mindy and also Karen are part of the Family Justice Center. What are the individuals that each partner plays in supporting survivors of gender-based violence, and how we bring those roles together to provide collective support. And again, we talked about that intersectional collaborative piece, and today we're going to focus on the collaborative piece. So you can go to the next slide. So just as a refresher, so we can have, I think it's really important to center these topics, these conversations around survivors. And for those of you that were able to join on Tuesday, we heard from Noemi. And Noemi is a survivor of intimate partner abuse, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Basically, she was met up with a childhood friend of hers when she was in her 40s. He had come to the US. She was still in Mexico. They reconnected. After a courtship of some time, he invited her to come to the US so that they could be married. When she got here, she realized that he was already married and had no intention of divorcing his partner. And so from that point on, there began to be a lot of intimate partner abuse that included physical abuse, threats, threatening with the legal process because Noemi was not documented, as well as threats to have once they had a child, have the child removed. There was a lot of sexual assault. And there was also labor trafficking because Noemi's partner brought her here under the guise of we're going to be married and have a family, but actually she ended up doing all of domestic work at his home and also having to work for him at his business, never saw any pay. Fortunately, Noemi, because of a great law enforcement officer that responded to Noemi's home when actually her partner called the police, this officer was well to partner violence and was able to identify that Noemi was a victim. And so he referred her to services, first to the to social services for child abuse, and then to the South County Family Justice Center. So Noemi was able to receive advocacy support through Community Solutions. She was connected to Step Forward Foundation, to Karen's organization for support around immigration law, family law, and then also worked closely with the Morgan Hill Police Department. So just as a refresher about who Noemi is. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen now to talk a little bit about the South County Family Justice Center, just again to show an example of how this collaboration, how it looks in real time. And Karen, I think after we're done with the 2 slides on the Family Justice Center, we're going to ask you to share your screen and share your PowerPoint, since I'm having some issues here at work with my computer. So I'll turn it over to Karen to talk a little bit about the Family Justice Center.
All right, now I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah, thank you. And Karen, as you get that up, one of the things, I don't think that on your PowerPoint, did you include the slides about the Family Justice Center on your PowerPoint?
I should have your entire
Perfect.
your entire one, and I'm just going to have to skip to my slides.
Okay, thank you, Karen. And while Karen, I just have to say how amazing Karen is. Karen left a comfortable private practice of immigration law to start a nonprofit in South County to focus on the immigration needs, particularly of survivors of gender-based violence, because in South Santa Clara County, that's a huge need. We don't really have any, most of the survivors that we work with don't have access to the other nonprofit agencies that are centered around San Jose, those other areas. And so that's just huge. Karen's been able to provide so much support through her organization to survivors in South Santa Clara County and San Benito County, and has also worked really hard to increase capacity for legal services through her organization to also include now family law, which is a huge need for survivors, as well as employment law. So thank you, Karen, for everything that you do.
My pleasure. So I just want to confirm that you guys are seeing the full screen Family Justice Center slide, right? Okay, awesome. Thank you. I want to make sure I set it up correctly. So thank you so much, Perla. I actually owe a huge deal of gratitude to Perla as well. She paints me in a very good light of leaving a private practice when really I always wanted to work in the nonprofit sector, and Perla and Community Solutions essentially incubated us in the beginning, me specifically, and as my team grew. And I mean, she and her team still are incubating us 10 years later, since we still operate out of this address here that you see on the screen, which is the Community Solutions address. It is also our address, so we are still very, very lucky. I am very eternally grateful that Perla took a chance on me, and it has grown into a really beautiful partnership, which, as Perla mentioned, has grown. And we have a lot of really wonderful partnerships, and I'm just so honored to be a part of that. So one of those things, as Perla was mentioning, is the Family Justice Center. I came in really right before the Family Justice Center was started, just by about a year. Perla brought me into what was a group of agencies, law enforcement agencies, probation, sheriff, Morgan Hill, Gilroy, DA. I'm probably missing some others in South County that came together to discuss how best to serve domestic violence survivors and Perla brought me in as a nonprofit legal services provider in order to contribute to that conversation. And it was really very shortly thereafter, within a year, that the idea of creating an actual family justice center came up. And so, of course, I jumped in on that as well. And it was a really beautiful transition from that group into creating the Family Justice Center. And what that is a bunch of these same agencies, law enforcement, DA, legal services, and of course, community solutions will be on site at this address once a week. For us, it's Wednesdays, and a survivor can come in and ask to speak to any one of our agencies for whatever their needs are. So for example, somebody can come in and they know that their abuser is in criminal proceedings, and so they can talk to the district attorney. This is one of my cats. You'll see the other one at some point, I'm sure. Can come in and ask the status of the case. Part of the DA's office is also the victim services advocates. That is part of the district attorney's office. So that person can also speak to that representative about seeking the victim compensation. And then of course we have the attorneys, immigration and family law, and they can talk to us, they can file a report. You'll hear about that from Detective Mindy. And we also have some other silent partners that aren't on site, but the idea is to be able to serve people where they're at with what they need. They come in and they haven't reported the abuse yet, they can do that, or they can follow up on a longstanding case, or maybe the abuse has already been prosecuted and now they're seeking help with family law services or immigration services. So that's it in a nutshell. Our vision, mission, and purpose, as I mentioned, I don't need to read it, but the main goal is to break the cycle of violence so that people can get out of their abusive situations and stay safe and not pass that on to their children. So I think we're doing a pretty good job in a difficult situation. So now I'll move on to talk about our role specifically. As I introduced, my organization is Step Forward. It's technically been around for about 10 years, but we've been active for about 6 or 7 years. I'm a licensed attorney, and now we have a staff of 10 of attorneys and paralegals and some admin. So we provide these legal services, as I mentioned, in family law and immigration, and we also take on full representation of people in these areas. We also have some contract attorneys that provide employment law services. They're not currently a part of the Family Justice Center on site, but we do have their expertise available if and when it comes up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of legal remedies for survivors that we do. Now, the caveat is that I'm an immigration attorney. I have never practiced family law. So this is about 95% immigration and 5% family law. Hopefully the family law is a little more self-explanatory, but I also don't want to be providing any information about something on which I am not very educated. So if you do have any other questions about the family law, you can always feel free to reach out to me in our organization if you have more specific questions about what we provide. So immigration remedies, this is just a brief overview of the kinds of things that I'm going to cover. You probably have heard of most of these, if not all of them already. So I'm just going to touch on each one of them and how it relates to the Family Justice Center and how the collaboration is really critical to us doing these. I like to create this little Venn diagram ish of all of these topics because they really overlap quite a bit. Asylum, T visa, VAWA, U visa, 765V, and there's a little teeny tiny space in the middle. It is actually possible for somebody to be eligible for all of them, or one of them, or two of them, or three of them, or four of them. So it's a really complicated area, and we try to cover as much of them as we can. So a very brief overview of the immigration process, just for those of you who may not be familiar. We have two main federal agencies that handle immigration related things, which is the Department of Homeland Security. They have ICE and CBP, which we all hear about, and they also have the Citizenship and Immigration Services, CIS, which is where we file the applications for these types of visas. So our primary workload is sending applications to USCIS, like the U visa and the T visa. We also have the Department of Justice. They run the immigration courts and the Board of Immigration Appeals, and they do the deportations. So when you have somebody who's going to court, they are appearing in front of the Department of Justice judge, and the opposing attorney is from ICE. So the very basics of immigration eligibility is always two parts. The first is that you have to qualify for a category, and the second is that you have to qualify for legal status generally, which we call admissibility. Now, of course, with all things in the law, there are many, many exceptions and waivers and all kinds of things. But when you break it down to the very bare bones, that's the mechanics of it. There's always two steps. So the types of documents that you'll see, of course, many, if not all of you will recognize these, there is the green card, which we call immigrant, which means permanent. If somebody is called an immigrant or getting an immigrant visa, it means they're coming to get permanent residency, and we call it the green card. They actually were not green for a very long time, and they just made them green again, which I think was very fitting. They caught on. In the middle is a visa. Visa is the actual pass that goes in somebody's passport that you show at the border. So it is not the visa eligibility. I know it's very, very small and you can't see it here, but the dates on the visa are actually the dates that the visa is usable at the border, and it is not the amount of time that a person is eligible to stay in the United States. And this can cut both ways. You can have a visa that is good for only 3 months, but it's for them to come into the country and get a green card. Or you can have like a tourist visa that is valid for 10 years, but it only allows the person to stay in the United States for 6 months. But that's what it looks like. And then of course, on the right, we have the employment authorization card. And that is very self-explanatory, and it's valid on the dates that it's given. So the first one we're going to cover is the U non-immigrant status, also known as the U visa. And that's one of the reasons I explained the documents, is that visa is actually a misnomer. Most people, the vast majority of people getting the U visa are actually already here in the United States and do not have to cross the border in order to obtain the status. So they're actually applying for the status itself, not the visa. But we call it the U visa, and everybody knows what you're talking about if you say that. So the very basics, they have to be a victim of a qualifying activity in the United States, be helpful in the investigation or prosecution of the crime, and have suffered substantial physical or mental abuse as a result of this crime. So of course, as you can imagine, we get a lot of these and we do a lot of them. So what is the most helpful thing in working with our partners? Well, they have to be helpful in the investigation or prosecution of the crime. Now, of course, it's a very broad definition. There doesn't have to actually be an investigation or prosecution, but there does have to be some sort of contact with a law enforcement agency, which can be as minimal as what the law calls a detection, which means reporting, that somebody has reported that a crime has taken place, and that then the reins are essentially turned over to the law enforcement, and it becomes their prerogative of whether or not they're going to initiate an investigation or prosecution. But for U visa purposes, they've met their requirement by reporting and being available to cooperate. And actually the term is whether or not they have refused to cooperate in an investigation or prosecution. So of course, as you can see, how does this relate to FJC? Well, somebody can come to us and say, I was a victim of domestic violence. And we say, have you reported it to law enforcement? And they say, no. So we say, well, as a matter of fact, here at the FJC, you can meet with a detective from the Morgan Hill Police. And as I mentioned before, they can also talk to somebody from the district attorney's office. That's not where they would report the crime, but they're also considered a law enforcement agency for purposes of the U visa. And then of course we have the substantial physical or mental abuse as a result of the criminal activity. So often that will involve having them get an advocate with Community Solutions and seeking mental health support. It's not a requirement that they do this, but of course, whenever we're working with survivors, we want to make sure that all of their needs are being met. And since they are necessarily suffering in some way, we want to make sure they're connected to a place like Community Solutions. So qualifying crimes. Sometimes I try to make this interactive, but I don't want to go too short on time. But what are some qualifying crimes that you think work for the U visa? Shout it out. Nobody wants to play? Okay.
Human trafficking?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, that's the list. There's a lot of crimes that qualify for a U visa. So very popular visa because there's a lot of options. So in terms of the FJC, these are the ones that are explicitly covered in the FJC. Of course, we do U visas for all of these crimes, but specifically referring to the FJC, these are the ones that are covered explicitly. But of course, many of these crimes can be other crimes that are a part of these other crimes. So you can have kidnapping and abduction that are a part of domestic violence or sexual assault. You can have murder, all of these things that will still fall into the broader categories of things like the domestic violence, sexual assault, and things of that nature. So certainly we don't limit to only doing these things at the FJC, but just to give you a perspective that you can also qualify for a U visa based on kidnapping that's unrelated to sexual assault or domestic violence or human trafficking. So the process, I get a lot of questions about this because it's very confusing and also very annoying. This is what a process looks like. So we can file an application, and again, that's with USCIS, as I mentioned before. They can have derivatives. There's a waiver of inadmissibility that I mentioned before, two-step process. They have to qualify for the U visa itself, but then they also have to be admissible. But with the U visa, there's a waiver of of these things that would otherwise make them ineligible. For example, if they have criminal convictions or they entered the United States without inspection, then those are the kinds of things that can be waived with the U visa. There is an annual cap on the number of U visas that USCIS will give out each year, which is 10,000. So once they hit that cap every year, as you can imagine. And so if their application is reviewed and the cap has already been reached, but it's preliminarily approvable, then they get put on this wait list and can receive an EAD, which is an employment authorization document, which is what I showed you before, the work permit. And then once it's their turn in the queue, they get the official U visa, which is valid for 4 years. There is some option of travel with many caveats. And then after having the U visa for 3 years and living in the United States, they can apply for the green card. So this is a path to citizenship, which is one of the reasons we love it so much. Now, the thing I get the most questions about is this part right here between filing, right here, is filing the application to being placed on the wait list and receiving a work permit. So for example, my most recent approval of an official U visa, I filed October 6th, 2015. It was waitlisted and we received the first work permit January 31st, 2020. It was officially approved January 12th, 2021. So that can give you an idea of how long people are waiting to get a work permit from USCIS for a U visa. It is a really, really long time. So again, Community Solutions can help us out because once we file an application, U visa applicants become eligible for public benefits. Community Solutions advocates, just like other victim service providers, will typically help our clients file for public benefits once they have the receipt notice, the notice that they have filed a U visa and they become eligible for public benefits. So again, collaboration is key. So now I'm going to start on the T. Similar, but a little lesser known. Same deal as before, it's T non-immigrant status. We call it the T visa. This is specifically for victims of human trafficking. They have to be physically present in the United States on account of the trafficking. So even though the trafficking doesn't necessarily have to occur in the United States, the person does have to be physically present in the United States related to that trafficking, which if it didn't happen in the United States is a much more difficult thing to do, but not technically impossible. But the vast majority of time, the person was trafficked here within the United States and is still here as a result of that. So again, they have to comply with a reasonable request for assistance from law enforcement and show that they would suffer extreme hardship upon removal. So if they had to go back to their home country. So that's a different requirement than the U visa. U visas don't have to show that they would suffer hardship upon return, but trafficking survivors do. So again, we're back here to having a requirement to work with law enforcement. Same as the U visa. If somebody comes to us and has been a victim of human trafficking and hasn't reported, we talk to them about the possibility of applying for a T visa. And if they're interested in doing that and are willing to report to law enforcement, we can recommend that they go meet with a detective. And then there is the continuing obligation to work with either an investigation or a prosecution. Now, of course, there is a qualifier that it has to be a reasonable request, but thankfully we have such a wonderful team here in Santa Clara County that I really have never encountered any unreasonable requests for assistance. But that is in there just in case for not Santa Clara County. All right, so again, very similar process. We can do a screening, then we can file. derivatives are family members that might be able to get a dependent status. There is also a waiver of inadmissibility. So again, if the person has things that would make them otherwise ineligible to immigrate. There is technically a cap for T visas, but in the 20 years that the T visa has been around, we have never reached the annual cap. So it has not ever become an issue, unlike the U visa. And then we have a similar final product, which is getting a official T visa, and which is valid for 4 years. There is some travel allowed with caveats, and then they can apply for the green card either after 3 years of continuous presence, or if the law enforcement actions have been completely closed, and we can request special permission to apply for the green card sooner than 3 years. So again, one of the differences with the T visa is that in the state of California, once somebody has been identified as a victim of human trafficking, they can become eligible for public benefits from the state. And so I, as an attorney, or my team, can write a letter essentially recognizing them as a victim of human trafficking, and I will give that to an advocate from Community Solutions or another service provider that's working with my client, and they can apply for public benefits even before we file the application. Of course, they can do it after they file the application as well, but it can get them benefits a little bit sooner, which is always very helpful. And then, of course, I forgot to put my little drop down arrow on end of law enforcement actions relating to our other law enforcement partners. So we also have VAWA, Violence Against Women Act. This one has been around for a lot longer, so I'm sure that everyone has heard of it. VAWA was actually a huge law that has many, many, many things as a part of it, but one of them was this immigration remedy. And so VAWA was basically created in the immigration context in order to combat abuse that was happening as a result of fraud measures that Congress put in place for family petitions, particularly in spousal petitions, where when a US citizen married a foreign national, they were worried about marriage fraud. And so they put into place a conditional residency requirement where a spouse that's been married to their US citizen spouse for less than 2 years at the time of the petition will get a temporary green card for 2 years, and then 2 years later they have to apply to remove the conditions in order for the foreign national to become a full permanent resident. But of course that led to a situation that was just ripe for abuse, where essentially the citizen could keep the foreign national spouse captive by threatening to not help them remove the conditions, and then it would expire and they'd get deported. So figuring this out, Congress instituted this Violence Against Women Act, which allows the abused spouse to file on their own. So you can see my little graphic where I have VAWA written over family petition. So it replaces the family petition. They can file it by themselves without their partner. They still have to prove a lot of the same things. They still have to prove that the marriage was a legitimate marriage, that they lived together, a lot of the same things as the family petition. And then they also have to prove that they were a victim of battery or extreme cruelty. So one of the major differences here is that there's no requirement of law enforcement being involved. They don't have to report it anywhere, and it doesn't have to be physical. So there's a lot of types of abuse that can fall into VAWA that are not technically a crime, that are not an actionable penal code. And and that is basically things that fall under extreme cruelty, things like financial abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse. We'll get a lot of those that aren't necessarily prosecutable crimes, but are still abuse. So adjustment of status, that means applying for a green card. That's our terminology in immigration, but the normal process is that there's a family petition and then they apply for a green card. VAWA can replace that family petition. So again, the process for this is that there is VAWA. It's called the self-petition. Depending on the status of the abuser, which can even be a parent or a child or a spouse, it's the same categories as if it were a family petition. So anybody who could have been petitioned, except for siblings, anybody who could have been petitioned by a family member, if they were abused instead, then there's usually a VAWA corollary. So in a lot of those categories, the person is not eligible to apply for the green card right away because there is a cap on the number of people that can apply for the green card each year based on their country of origin and the relationship to the petitioner and the petitioner's status. So an example of that is spouses of permanent residents. There's a cap. And so sometimes there's a 1 or 2 year wait because of that cap. So they can file a petition and get put in the queue. And sometimes that queue is nothing and they can file right away, or sometimes it's longer. So in that situation, they can get what's called this VAWA deferred action, which basically means that they've been recognized that they are an abused family member, abused spouse, and they can get a work permit while they're waiting for their turn to apply for the green card. And again, they can become eligible for public benefits. So by filing for VAWA, and a lot of this is very state specific. It's not federal benefits, it's state benefits, but we are very lucky to live in this generous state. And so again, try to get them on their feet as soon as possible, get them out of the abusive situation while they wait for their work authorization and ultimately for their green card. And I apologize if you guys can hear some background noise. Apparently, with my luck, there's some like major construction going on my street. So that worked out really well to have to give a presentation on that day. So I apologize for that. Hopefully it's not too distracting. And the last one that I'm going to cover is Asylum. So it's not usually the one that you think of when you are thinking of serving domestic violence survivors, but unfortunately it is extremely common, and actually a large portion of our caseload is working with victims of gender-based violence from other countries, and none of the abuse happened in the United States. So all those options that I just went over are not available to them, even though they were victims of some of the most brutal and dehumanizing abuse. If it happened in another country, then for the most part, we can't file those other things for them. Even for VAWA, even if their abuser happens to be a US citizen and is abusing them in another country, there has to still be a connection to the United States. So we're going to be looking at Asylum, which is actually in the middle of a huge amount of litigation from the past administration. Hopefully will be changing in the coming months, but gender-based violence is and isn't a good ground to apply for asylum. It depends on the perspective of the judge and case law that keeps coming out. The last administration was trying to really prevent gender-based asylum claims. And like I said, hopefully that will change, but it's basically been the topic of litigation for decades. Preceding the Trump administration, it's always been a hot topic, for better or worse. So the technical requirements is that they have to have a well-founded fear of future persecution upon return that is based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or a particular social group. So a lot of this litigation is falling under this particular social group category because, as you can see, gender is not one of the statutorily listed grounds that we can use. So we have to argue that gender is a particular social group, and that by being essentially in the gender-based context, that essentially being a woman in that society marks them for persecution. And so there's law around with the well-founded fear, if the person has been abused in the past, they automatically have a presumption of a well-founded fear of future persecution. Since the vast majority of asylum claims that are filed, somebody is fleeing something that's already happened to them. They're not usually fleeing something that they're afraid will happen. Of course that happens, but usually they're escaping some sort of abuse. And so we are arguing that what happened to them is persecution that was based on being a member of a particular social group, like women. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. There's a lot of issues for asylum. One of the other ones being the litigation is around who did the persecuting. It's supposed to be, we have to show that the government is unable or unwilling to protect them. Recent litigation wants to see that the government is the persecutor themselves, because they're trying to prevent showing that a non-government actor, like a husband, is the abuser, and he is not a government employee and he is not abusing his wife on behalf of the government, and therefore it doesn't qualify for asylum. So that's the litigation that's going on right now. That's the major point of contention. Still hasn't really resolved, but that's what the topics are. Not the best option, definitely, but sometimes it's our only option. And just some other requirements: they have to file within 1 year, and they can't have an aggravated felony conviction to qualify for asylum. Very quickly, just the process is filing the application, attending an interview. If the person is not already in removal proceedings, and then if the asylum office does not want to approve it, they can send them into removal proceedings, where they go to a master calendar hearing and a trial. Assuming they're approved, they can apply for a green card after 1 year, or at the first stage, if they're approved, they can go straight to that. Or if they're already in removal proceedings, like if they were apprehended at the border or presented themselves at the border, then they skip this first step and go straight into the master calendar trial and apply for a green card. If they're approved. All right, and as promised, the last 2% of my talking about family law, which is, my knowledge is minimal at best, which is by design. I don't ever want to practice family law, and I tease my family law attorneys about that all the time, is that the types of services are pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, we have people coming into the FJC seeking divorce from their abuser, seeking custody of their kids. That's probably one of the biggest reasons that our survivors are afraid to leave their abusers, as you all know. So we are usually dealing with custody. We deal with DV restraining orders. Of course, a lot of the victim service providers assist with filing the restraining orders, and if an attorney becomes necessary, if it's contested, then we'll try to step in and represent the person in court if there's other issues going on. Oh, and I put custody on there twice. I was tired when I wrote this. And then also there's spousal and child support, which again, as all of us who work with survivors know, children and finances are the biggest impediments to somebody leaving. So those are the things that we try to work the hardest to help people get out of a situation. I've been working with two women who are married to brothers, and surprise, both of the brothers are abusive. And so they've been trying to get out of the relationships, of the marriages, and their biggest fears. One of them has already gotten out, thankfully, because her husband became really violent one night and she called the police and got out. The other one's husband hasn't been physically violent in a while, and so she's been more hesitant to leave because of these things, because they don't have finances, they don't have jobs. They came here on valid visas, but then their husbands refused to petition for them. And so they became undocumented. They don't have social security numbers yet. They don't have work authorization yet. And they have young children. One of them gave birth while I was representing her. And so both I and one of my family law attorneys were working with them to cover all of these issues. And the one that's gotten out, she has a DV restraining order, she has custody orders, she has support. And because her husband was very wealthy, or his family was very wealthy, she's now living in one of the family-owned homes away from the abuser, and is processing divorce. So again, I don't have a ton of the mechanics or details on that, but if anybody has questions about that, we have two family law attorneys at Step Forward. So if you want to talk about that or need more information, please feel free to reach out to us. And that is all I have. My PowerPoint says 40 minutes and 42 seconds, so I'm going to call that good. All right, I will turn it over to Mindy.
Okay, so thank you ladies for that very warm welcome. I appreciate it, but I too am also very grateful to work with Karen, everybody at the Family Justice Center, Perla. I think I've worked with Perla my entire career. I've been with the Morgan Hill Police Department for 23 years, and it was actually through Perla who really taught me the role of the advocate and how important they are to helping our victims of crime, our survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and our children in our community who have been victimized as well. So I have a very, very special place in my heart for Community Solutions and the work that they do. And I'm so thankful that they are here in Morgan Hill. Because when we talk about helping victims of crime, it's always a hardship for them to get the help that they need when they have to travel to different areas. So having Community Solutions here in Morgan Hill has been amazing support for them in that regard. But then as the years progressed and as law enforcement changed, we learned about the Family Justice Center movement and the wonderful work that they're doing and all the needs that are being met, and how important collaboration is to helping victims of crime, to helping law enforcement accomplish the goal of their investigations, which is holding offenders, batterers accountable, and helping families become whole. So I was, Perla and I were together when we first started talking about starting our Family Justice Center in Morgan Hill. And the We invited stakeholders who we thought would be able to fit into this idea and this format of collaboration. And I will tell you, the first meeting and the second meeting, I think we only had 2 before we decided, yeah, let's do it. It was great. Everybody was in. Everybody agreed on how it was going to work, and we were excited to figure it out. But also, Perla, through Community Solutions, was the first one to raise her hand and said, hey, let's start the Family Justice Center. Community Solutions will house it. And so that is the beginning of a very wonderful dream that came true for all of us in South County. And throughout the county, actually, because our Family Justice Center was the first one in Santa Clara County, which led to other ones that are north of us. And they operate under our model. But we all work really well together, and we all share this collaborative vision. So I'm very proud of that, and I'm happy to be a part of it. All right, so I am the law enforcement component, aside from the DA's office. I'm the investigative side of the Family Justice Center. And so what that means is I meet with survivors that come into the Family Justice Center, and either they have already reported the crime, or maybe they're going to report, and I would be the contact for that. So when I meet with survivors at the Family Justice Center, I will investigate felony cases and misdemeanor cases of domestic violence. And I'll investigate them or follow up with them, which means do the follow-up work in the investigative process. But also I will take reports for outside agencies. So for instance, we'll end up with a survivor at our Family Justice Center from out of state, from out of county, from other Bay Area law enforcement jurisdictions, and they will report to us. And so I will document their case, and I would forward it back to the appropriate agency. And I'll tell you, when I do those outside agency report documentations, you never know what you're going to get. Some cases are misdemeanor cases that I'm documenting. Other cases are very serious assault cases, domestic violence, sexual assault, just severe violence that is happening. So those cases can get very complex. I don't turn any of them away. And then the point is obviously get that report to the right agency so that the continued investigation can occur, but also to help our survivors get the help that they need. And I think it really starts with being heard and being heard by law enforcement. Law enforcement has a very big role in holding offenders accountable, but also I think it's important for law enforcement to understand the value of helping somebody get through a hurdle. There's lots of bias against law enforcement or just the justice system overall. Like, it's a really big component, and some folks don't understand it. They don't know how to come forward, or there's all these hesitations or apprehensions, whether they're perceived or they're real. So I think it's very important to break those barriers and really help the person I'm meeting with, put them at ease and help them feel comfortable telling me their story. And I feel honored to be chosen to listen to that story and treat it with respect and dignity, and help the person before me heal, because in the end, that's what we want. So regardless if the case goes to the end in prosecution, or maybe the survivor doesn't want to move forward anymore because of a lot of things, and it's not up to me to decide. It's up to our survivor to do what is right for them. So however it goes, I'm happy to do the work. And most importantly, I always say, if they don't want to continue with me, I want them to continue with Community Solutions or an advocacy agency to help them in all the other areas that will make them healthy again. And I love to see that full circle, because I've seen survivors from beginning to end, and I love when the end is they're happy and they're doing their hair and they're putting their makeup on and they just feel great and they're smiling and they look good and they speak well. And so anyway, that's my favorite part. But either way, I'm currently assigned to our Family Justice Center 1 day a week. It's Wednesdays for us. Of course, because of COVID, a lot of us are working offsite, but I do still go to the Family Justice Center and meet with survivors there for an interview. And I do the follow-up. Like I said, the follow-up is not only just the investigation, but it's also the evidence collection. And some of that is getting the text messages that are harassing. It's taking injury photos. It's making sure that they get the medical care that they need, and making sure that their needs are being met too. So let's say I meet with somebody on a follow-up and I learn that their housing is unstable, or they need basic stuff for their children to be well in the winter, food, clothing, all this stuff. So I'll circle back with Community Solutions, say, hey, let's support them with this, and we'll brainstorm. We brainstorm ideas on temporary housing, on where we can get the resource for this family. Let's say a person moves into a new home, they don't have any furniture. We'll brainstorm, okay, how can we get furniture to this? And we look at what our community has to offer to make this happen for this family. So we look at the whole picture. And like I said, I document the cases for outside agencies. Go to next slide. Part of meeting with our survivors while we are in the middle of an investigation, whether the offender is in custody or outstanding, we always do a joint safety planning. And I love the joint safety planning because that means it's myself, the survivor, and his or her advocate. And we sit down together and we talk about what has happened, what is currently happening, what are the survivors' concerns, and we plan around that. And also we look at their lifestyle. For instance, let's say we have a survivor that has a long commute and works the night shift, or some ends work during hours of darkness. Then we talk about safety planning with regard to traveling that distance, walking to and from your car at the end of your work day, parking somewhere safe and well-lit area. So we look at the whole thing and come up with a plan. If let's say they're still in the home with the offender, and we talk about, okay, how are you going to be safe? How can we keep you safe while you're at home? What if this happens? What would be your plan? Are you comfortable doing this? So we talk about those things. When we're dealing with stalking, I look at the propensity for violence. I look at the severity of violence, because stalking has all kinds of different levels, and it's very unpredictable. And stalking really affects our survivors in that they feel always followed, always harassed, always in fear of violence, whether it's perceived or real, because it's so constant. So we come up with safety planning surrounding stalking as well. And that also goes along the lines of social media safety, right? If they're trying to prevent from having folks know where they are or what they're doing or who they're communicating with. We talk about safety in regard to that. Also do lethality assessment. I've trained a lot of Bay Area agencies, Santa Clara County, San Benito County, on lethality assessment for first responders. And so basically what that is, I train the first responders about lethality. And Santa Clara County has a lethality assessment form, which every law enforcement partner who is investigating a domestic violence incident will complete the lethality assessment with a survivor at that time. And that form is a great tool because it helps us identify if there's stalking, if there's sexual violence, if others are at risk, if there's a gun in the home, if strangulation has occurred. All of that is important because it'll tell you what to be looking for in the course of your investigation, and absolutely the lethality risk for that survivor. And we share this information with our survivors so that they understand their situation from an outside source by really looking at what's happening. And then obviously safety planning involves offering our survivors emergency protective orders. And also with that, if the situation calls for it, applying for a gun violence restraining order so that we can remove guns from the home or remove guns from access to the offender. And then I'm going to go back to emergency protective orders. If I'm able to get one for my survivor, then it's also my job to make sure that that offender gets contacted and served. This way that order is valid for that brief period of time. It's just a week, but that gives the survivor time to work with their advocate to apply for a longer restraining order. So anyway, that's the safety planning part of meeting with my survivors. Also, part of the safety planning too is if, let's say, the survivor suffered strangulation and she still has injuries, then we want to make sure some of that safety planning is having her understand the risks of strangulation, the health risks, and what to look out for and when to seek medical attention. If that hasn't happened, or just be aware to go and seek it if things change as a result of strangulation. Next slide. All right, so yeah, the more follow-up includes, let's say the survivor meets with me weeks later. She wants to know what's the status with the investigation, and her and I will meet. I'll look up the report. I can tell her it's been transferred to the DA's office, or it's still being investigated. Let's say the offender's outstanding, we're still looking for him or her. And then also I will contact the DA's office to find out what's going on with this case at the DA's office. When's the next court date? And so I'll relay all that back to our survivor and her advocate, because, well, pre-COVID, we would go to court together. I would go to court, obviously, to present the case. Survivor would go to court with her advocate, and we support her during that process. This way she doesn't feel alone. This way it's less scary, less intimidating. There's fear of seeing the offender again in court setting. So we worked through all of that and prepped our survivor for that. So that will be part of the status investigation. Again, reassess for safety. You know, things change because life goes on. And so we reassess where our survivor is. Has anything changed? Are there any new concerns that we need to address? And so we're constantly doing the reassessment for safety. And then again, like I mentioned, the medical care. And, you know, working with your advocate to ensure survivor support is very important to me. Throughout the process, I always relay back to with our advocate, how are they doing? Do I need to do anything more? Or the survivor mentioned this, can you circle back with her or him on that aspect? And then I also provide training to our law enforcement partners, to our advocates, really anybody who asks for training with regard to law enforcement responses to domestic violence or legal mandates, anything related to domestic violence. I'm more than happy to provide the training for it. I think it's important to understand the dynamics of domestic violence. I think it's important to hold batterers accountable. I think it's important to provide support and safety for our survivors and our children, the children that are seeing this or also maybe also being victimized in the home. So it's good work to do, and I'm happy doing it. Next slide. All right, so yeah, these are some of the training topics: domestic violence issues, first responder legal mandates, prosecution, restraining order violations, victim support and referrals, lethality assessment, stalking, strangulation. So yeah, you know, any one of these things I can present on. I'm happy to do it. I've done it. And you know, every year our domestic violence protocol is reviewed and updated based on the best practices that we've learned. Or let's say maybe a case, you know, that we dealt with the previous year changed everything, and we were like, whoa, you know, we address it this way, maybe let's look at implementing this, or let's pilot this particular thing. Like for instance, through the Family Justice Center, the County of Santa Clara started a strangulation pilot program, which is phenomenal. I don't know why we didn't do it sooner, but we're still in the pilot. But through that, so basically what that means, for instance, we have a sexual assault exam, forensic exam that occurs when a person is sexually assaulted. And that is such a great thing to have because of the evidence that you get from those forensic exams. Well, now because we're learning that strangulation is highly lethal to the survivor, and it tells us the propensity for violence and severity of that offender. Gathering the forensic evidence of from strangulation exam supports our case. So instead of it being filed as a felony injury or a misdemeanor, because there's no injury case, now it can be charged as a attempted murder case or assault with a deadly weapon case. It just depends, but it's a stiffer penalty. It's held to a higher standard when it comes to the charging offenses. So anyway, the pilot came as a result of looking at the best practice, and we're doing it now. And I really hope to see it be established just like our sexual assault response forensic exams. Next slide. Oh, that's it. Geez, I went through all of that already.
That was awesome. I wanted to, and there's going to be also some opportunity for questions and answers at the end. But if there's any questions that you have right now for Mindy or for Karen, just to take a little bit of a breather, we can also take those now. You want to put it in the chat, or you're free to open your microphone and just ask.
I have a question for Mindy.
Yes, please.
Hi, Mindy. Thank you for sharing. What an amazing resource you must be for Morgan Hill. I'm in Gilroy, and I wish we had a you in Gilroy. I think the question that I would ask as a survivor myself, and strangulation was part of my story, and it raised the likelihood that he would kill me. That quiz, I didn't understand it then, but now I do. My question would be, in looking at Santa Clara County's domestic violence numbers, even though we are intervening more and have more services, it looks like our numbers are staying high. If you had to say one missing piece or one thing that we could be doing better to prevent or even intervene in domestic violence, what would you say we could do better or more of that we don't have?
Well, I have two thoughts. Number one, COVID has been terrible for all of us, especially our survivors. People are losing their jobs. You know, if the offender lost the job, now he's in the home. If our survivor doesn't work or lost her job too, they're all in the home. And the stressors that COVID has caused, I think that is what we're seeing in terms of numbers. So what could we do differently? I think under the umbrella of COVID, I think more exposure, having conversations like this with the community, letting people know that Community Solutions is still open and working and committed to helping. So is our Family Justice Center. Any of your work that you do to help victims of crime. I think getting that out there, finding ways to reach them. I think that is like the #1 thing we could be doing right now under the COVID umbrella. But outside of that, I think, Community Solutions does a lot of really good events like the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes, things that are out in the public. I think those things are important to do. We need to find other things to bring to light, either social media or in the public, again, a public event. I think those are the best ways to do it. Also, make sure that we're reaching the population in their language. I think that is important to do. Sometimes I think that's always, I think it's done. I think we could do better.
Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Mindy. Really appreciate that. So when we think about, again, bringing it all together, the work that we do around gender-based violence, and when I say we, I'm talking about Community Solutions and all of our partners, we really try to take a comprehensive approach that has 4 main components. And we start with our service values, ensuring that our services as advocates and that we're providing the support to also our partners to ensure that we're upholding values that are trauma-informed, survivor-centered, empowerment-based, and culturally responsive. And I'm sure you could tell from hearing Karen and Mindy that they truly understand those values and are bringing them into their work. The other piece is training and technical assistance. So we provide training to the other family justice centers. As Mindy mentioned, the South County Family Justice Center was the first justice center in our county. And it was actually through the impetus of Chief David Swing, who used to be the chief of police at the Morgan Hill Police Department, was really a strong supporter of survivors of gender-based violence, and thankfully his values have also really penetrated the entire Morgan Hill PD, because Morgan Hill PD is certainly seen as a model for law enforcement response, particularly around areas of gender-based violence. The other piece is protocol development. So the protocol development that is multidisciplinary. Mindy mentioned the domestic violence law enforcement protocol, and that protocol is updated every year. And there is participation from spearheaded by the DA's office, but there's participation from law enforcement, from advocates, from social workers, from legal service providers, and other individuals, professionals doing the work. The other piece is collaborative community outreach. And so Vanessa brought up a really good question of how do we try to eliminate or reduce intimate partner violence and gender-based violence in general. And so that's why it's so important for us, for me to uphold this collaborative approach to gender-based violence in everything that we do, not just the direct services, but also the community outreach and prevention, so that when the community sees us providing presentations around this issue with law enforcement, with attorneys, they are more likely to feel comfortable, to see the approach, to see how the collaborative approach, and also to see survivors can see, oh, wow, Mindy is really approachable. I am able to talk to her, or Karen, or some, if we bring individuals from the DA's office or from victim witness. The other piece is through collaborative partnerships. And so we use what we call interdisciplinary collaboration, and that refers to, for example, all the domestic violence agencies in the county. We work very closely together with the Next Door Solutions to Domestic Violence, Asian Americans for Community Involvement, the YWCA, MyTree, and Community Solutions. We have the Domestic Violence Advocacy Consortium, and we have several committees that are part of that group. And it's really important for us to work very closely together to provide seamless support for survivors across the county, because sometimes it's not safe for survivors perhaps to come into our shelter. So we have to refer to other organizations, vice versa. Sometimes we even co-case manage, and we're referring survivors based on their linguistic, cultural needs, et cetera. Also working very closely with law enforcement agencies, Department of Family and Children's Services, as well as medical providers, and the list goes on and on. I think it's really important to identify what all the supports are that survivors are going to need and ensure that we're building partnerships in those areas. The other piece is the comprehensive services. And so ensuring crisis response for survivors of intimate partner abuse, sexual assault, and human trafficking, confidential advocacy, victim witness support, immigration and family law services are super important, law enforcement. And Mindy referred to the joint and safety planning efforts. And this is something that we feel really strongly about. So we developed through our Family Justice Center a joint safety planning protocol for high lethality cases. And so when we're working with a survivor that we're very concerned about their safety, we, instead of having a case consultation on the side about the survivor and asking our partners, what should this person do? We tell the survivor, we're very concerned about your safety. We'd like to offer you a joint safety planning session. It's your choice who you want to be a part of that session. And if they've met Mindy, they always want Mindy to be there. And so they have the option to having their advocate there, somebody from victim witness, if they want their family law attorney or their immigration attorney there, law enforcement. It's really up to the survivor. So it's joint safety planning with the survivor, not about the survivor. And that piece is really important. And the other piece is the case management approach and housing. And we actually have two of our amazing advocates, I believe, on the call, Pam Garcia and Myra, that work in the housing department for Community Solutions, because the comprehensive services really do need to extend beyond the crisis. And our average, I think I shared this on Tuesday, our average length of case management is 3 to 5 years. And that's really wraparound support that includes housing access as well. We can go to the next slide, please. So the purpose of when we bring together those 4 ingredients, really the goal is to have an intended collective impact that includes increased safety for survivors, increased understanding of systems and survivor rights for survivors, for advocates doing this work, increased access to other systems and resources for survivors, increased emotional and physical well-being, streamlining the support. As I mentioned, it's so important to have those interdisciplinary as well as multidisciplinary collaborations and more responsive systems. And again, this work is all centered around the survivors. So the survivors are at the center, and we're hoping to, by the work that we do together, to be able to garner this collective impact. We can go to the next slide, please. So there's one slide that didn't make it to the slide deck because but this is the contact information for Karen, for Mindy. Feel free to take a screenshot. We also included here Vishal from the DA's office, who is the supervising deputy district attorney that's assigned to our Family Justice Center. And he is also amazing with survivors, with our partners. So really a great resource as well. But one of the things that we're hoping to do today is to actually have a breakout session and really provides a space for all of you to check in with each other. So since the slide didn't make it here, I just put into the chat box. In your breakout session, I believe you're going to break out for about 15 minutes. And we will have a couple of questions for you. And one is, what new information did you learn as the result of participating in Tuesday's training and today's training? What was the most surprising to you? And then the last one that we hope that informs the question and answer section is, what are you confused or unclear about? So that the first 2 questions, what new information did you learn? Again, that's in the chat box if you want to copy it. What was most surprising to you? That's for you all to talk amongst yourself. And the last piece, what are you confused or unclear about? We really would love to hear, again, that be brought into the question and answer portion. So I believe we're going to break out for about 15 minutes, and I'll see you all back here in about 15 minutes. I hope you all enjoyed your breakout session, and we're going to just give it a few seconds for all of your colleagues to make their way back. Unfortunately, Karen and Mindy had to leave and are not able to be here for the Q&A portion, but both of them did include their name and their phone number and their email address in the chat box. And they really encourage questions. So please feel free to reach out to them directly. Karen's also encouraging folks to refer individuals for free immigration or family law consultations as well to the Step Forward Foundation. So I think we have everyone back, and I'm just going to open it up. Which group would like to share first in terms of your conversation, and particularly around if there's any issues that are still confusing or you'd like some more information about?
So I'll start. This is Leah with the Santa Clara County Probation Department, and our breakout group. One of the questions that we had was, this is, a wonderful program that you're offering in South County. Wondered if there is the same kind of program where there's collaboration in, say, the north portion of Santa Clara County, Palo Alto, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, and in central San Jose, and central Santa Clara County as well.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Leah. There are 3 family justice centers across the county, and each operate based to capacity and limited resources 1 day a week. So every Wednesday, we operate the South County Family Justice Center in Morgan Hill out of Community Solutions Office. And then on Thursdays, Asian Americans for Community Involvement operates a Family Justice Center out of its Story Road office. And on Fridays, the YWCA operates out of their Sunnyvale office, the North County Family Justice Center. If you Google Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office Family Justice Centers, you'll be able to download a brochure that has information about the 3 family justice centers across the county. And actually, Step Forward Foundation also provides some of the legal supportive services to the North County FJC. One thing I will say is that we're very, very, very fortunate in South County because it's a smaller community. We're only dealing with 3 law enforcement jurisdictions: Morgan Hill PD, Gilroy PD, and the Sheriff's Office that oversees the unincorporated areas. So that provides an opportunity for forming much closer partnerships as compared to, for example, the Central or North County FJCs, where perhaps they're working with 7 or 8 different law enforcement agencies, and also the volume of reports for intimate partner violence or sexual assault is going to look very differently in South County based on the population as opposed to like San Jose. So the DA's office is very interested in, because even though Chief Swing from the Morgan Hill PD started the family justice centers, the DA's office has taken this on, and they're very interested in growing all 3 of the family justice centers and really streamlining all of the protocols so that all 3 operate in the same way. But as far as the victim services piece and legal services piece, each one of the 3 centers can offer basically the same supportive services. Thank you, Leah. Who'd like to go next?
Hi, everybody. This is Nina from Sacred Heart Community Services in San Jose. And our group had a few questions. The first one, maybe I don't know if there's time to ask all of them, but one that was kind of similar that a few people had is like how to go about doing those warm handoffs to the different DV agencies that we have available so that clients feel comfortable reaching out to them, just because it's great to hear about all the services that are provided. Before, I didn't know as much about the specific services that each one provided. So yeah, kind of how to do that so that people aren't feeling like, concerned if knowing that they can trust and feel comfortable calling, I guess, because we know that we trust you, and it's more, the clients often feel like concerned and nervous doing that themselves.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a couple of ways. One of them, I mentioned the condensed victim needs screening tool that's for COC providers. And if any of you are interested in that presentation, and some of you may have already participated in that, we're happy to provide that. But there's also, as part of that presentation, there's a list of all of the service providers, as well as how to do the warm handoff piece. So I can speak for Community Solutions, you basically would call our crisis line and let us know there's a survivor that I want to refer to your services. can I set up a time for her to come in? And what works really well is, and right now, obviously, because a lot of things are going virtual, but our offices are still open, is either coming into the office with your client and doing the introduction in that way, or if you want to do it again over the crisis line, just explaining your role and the support that your client needs, and then connecting the client to the advocate over the phone is a way to do that. And from what I understand, all of the service providers also can take warm handoffs in that way. And on Tuesday, I provided in the PowerPoint, there is a list of all the service providers, the languages, language capacity that we each have, as well as the geographic service area that we cover. And destination home folks should have access to that and can provide that to you. Do you want to go with your next question, or do you want me to try to go with the groups and then come back to you?
Yeah, we can do one quick kind of follow-up, and then the other one, it's all good. But the next one is about if often the service providers prioritize survivors that are in fleeing an unhealthy abusive situation in the moment, because there was also the question of people that have gone through it years ago often have more trouble getting through because they're already in a safe situation.
That's a really good question. So you're talking about prioritize for shelter specifically, or for services in general?
Services in general, but also for shelter, yeah.
So for shelter specifically in Santa Clara County, there are 62 beds for survivors of intimate partner violence. And that's counting the 4 agencies that provide emergency shelter. So combined, we have a total of 62 beds. And every year we are turning away about 2,000 shelter requests. And those are duplicate numbers. Like if somebody calls Community Solutions and we don't have space, and then they call next door and they don't have space, that's counted as two turnaways. So because there's such limited number of emergency beds, we do have to, and the purpose of the shelters, the domestic violence shelters, was really to provide a confidential, safe location for individuals that were fleeing abusive relationships or situations and were at immediate risk of harm. But if somebody is in a situation where they don't have any other housing options, and we don't have capacity, we do hotel individuals while we figure out a plan for them, because we don't want anybody to be out on the street. So yes, for the shelter itself, we do have to prioritize based on limited space, survivors that are fleeing situations that are at risk. And as far as the other services, we support survivors regardless of where they are. I mean, we think about, like, for example, individuals that are applying for a U visa and the situation happened like 4 or 5 years ago, they're still going to need that case management support. So we still provide all the wraparound services that we offer all survivors the same access to. It's really based on equity and what the survivors need. But then again, the emergency shelter piece, we are prioritizing survivors at immediate risk, but there's also opportunities to provide hotels for at least for a few days or a week while that individual has no other housing option. Our focus is really supporting survivors to get into long-term housing and self-sufficiency and stability, so they don't have to go back into a shelter. That's why the long-term support is so important. Okay, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nina. Who would like to go next?
Hello, this is Sonia with Home First. We actually didn't have too many questions, and what we commented on was just how we were thought it was interesting to learn that San Jose was among like the top for human trafficking. That was kind of unexpected for some of us, and also even though we go to a lot of these trainings, similar information, and like we have common knowledge, just the reminder that the percentage of people who are impacted by these types of things, it's usually someone like that, we kind of forget that piece, and just trying to be more aware and helping program participants be more aware that it's not necessarily a stranger, and just that's a good reminder.
Thank you, Sonia. That's a really important point. I think we had several groups, so we've heard so far from 3. Who would like to go next?
Yeah, I think I can share.
Thank you.
So, no problem. My name is Denver. I'm with Bill Wilson Center. And one of the things I shared in my group is that it's great to know the history behind the VAWA. Well, I thought one of our speakers did a great job in explaining the background of that it came out of the situation of persons who are entering the country beholden to someone, right? And so they're vulnerable to abuse of that person who was probably a spouse or would be a spouse or of that person. So therefore, the VAWA, to protect them and allow them to directly process the whatever is involved in getting them their document or their citizenship status handled by them directly. So I thought that's great. And also in terms of kind of remembering, right, these concepts, these different resources, the background is really helpful in allowing us to access them more readily.
Thank you, Denver. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Okay. Anybody else want to share? So not seeing anybody, just for last thoughts on my part, I can understand that sometimes as you're trying to access services for your clients, that it may be frustrating, that perhaps you're calling different shelters and there's no capacity. I would love to hear from all of you if you're having that experience, because again, we do work very closely with all of the members of the Domestic Violence Advocacy Consortium, 4 of which provide emergency shelter. We're always open to feedback on how we can do things better. And we also have to know if there's any type of training issues that are coming up with our staff. So I really would encourage you to reach out to me. I'm happy if you're having a situation either with our agency or any of the other service providers. I'm happy to do a warm handoff to perhaps some managers from different agencies to help brainstorm how we can better work together and reduce the amount of trauma and frustration for our clients, survivors of gender-based violence. So I don't have anything else. Thank you all for being here and for your participation and engagement. And I don't know if Destination Home wants to say any words before we end today's workshop.
Yes, just thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And we have put in a survey in the chat that we'd love for you to fill out. We take all of your feedback very seriously, and love to hear about ways we can always improve our trainings. And thank you again, just for your patience with some of the technical difficulties today. And special thanks to our presenters, Perla, Karen, and Detective Mindy. So thanks again. We hope to see you next week for day 3. That's going to be on March 18th at 10 a.m. Thanks again.
And then Tara has a question. Sorry, Tara. If you want to just email me directly, my email's in the chat. I'm happy to connect you to Detective Mindy Sen, or you can email her directly for your question as well. Thank you.